Hello everybody. Today I have a time lapse of how I created this matched pair of two watercolor and ink illustrations I'm calling Past the Lamppost. Started with some cheap watercolor pulp paper from a pad, wet them down so I could do wet on wet. I'm using some Cotman tube watercolor that was already in this palette. I think most of the colors for the base on the warm side are some yellow ochre, some burnt umber, some black for desaturation. And I really got very wet here, probably too much, and it was splashing onto my other paper. Just to clean that up with some tissue and move on. And then I do the same with the cool side with blues and purples. I think I had a magnesium hue and some ultramarine, some Prussian blue, and black again to desaturate. Looks like I lost a clip here, but the first layer is the same as this layer. I put down another layer of deeper colors to give more contrast to the closer areas, and then drag the brush down straight from one wet area to another to create each of the tree trunks. My watercolor is still got a lot of water in it, so it'll be translucent, but enough that you won't see the line from behind. I only did 2 of these layers in watercolor, and the next one will be in ink, but the concept is the same. Build up those edges and then drag your brush down from one wet zone to another so the colors will blend and flow through the places that your brush has gone. And while this was drying, I actually took a dry brush and pulled some of the watercolor off the base where the forest floor is. I apologize for not having footage of it, to place where my paths would be, and then with pencil I drew in a rough sketch of what each lamppost would look like. Then with the Micron, I think 01 pen, I drew those in, and yes, I use a ruler to keep my lines straight. Then with Liquitex, latex-based ink, no, acrylic ink, it's acrylic, I, with the brush, start creating the closest layer of trees. Putting in the detailed little branches, even though I'm about to cover them up, and the main trunks, to create that hallway effect that a thick wooded area does. And then let my branches that I placed be my guide for the thickest layers of foliage that'll be fully silhouetted. No light will pass through these sections. And do the same on the other, somewhat mirrored, but also let it be organic and just kind of place the branches where they want. Then switching to a much smaller brush, I'm applying the little leaves. I'm stippling in all the little bits that fray out from the large areas of foliage that no light was penetrating. Now the thinner areas around that area, you can see the shadows of the individual leaves. And I like how, since we've built up those layers of gradients and colorings, they can still peek through and create the proper depth that, yes, there's still forest through those, and the correct coloring and shadow is behind there. This part takes a long time, but this is the therapeutic part for me. I love the tiny little details, and I really love the opaque black ink combined with watercolor in my illustrations. The contrast, just, I love it. I love contrast. And adding all these little bits over a 30-40 minute period is so relaxing. And then I switch to watercolor with that tiny brush so I can build up the texture and detail in the layers that are just past the silhouetted area. This may have been able to be done earlier in the watercolor process, but I didn't think of it then. The piece decided when it needed what, and at this point I decided I needed more detail and depth in the misty areas behind, down the path. So I mixed up some colors and a highly watered down wash and stippled that on to really bulk out those areas. The upper trees, the far background, and then the ground foliage in the front. I really think this makes a big difference in the texture and the dimension of the piece. It really does feel like the path continues on past that lamppost now, whereas before it maybe ended right there. Now you can see that there's a fading depth of field down this path, down whichever path you decide, the path of light or the path of shadow. Doing the same with the blue side, blues and purples, creating a wash and stippling that in to give the background areas some character, some depth, some more interest. Then I got out my white ink, also the Liquitex acrylic ink, gave the inside of the lamp posts their highlight, although I'll come back and deepen that with this ball pen. It's a ball gel pen. It's got a big open ballpoint tip, and then I also used the Jelly Roll brand white opaque ink, because currently it has a much finer tip and I don't have the other brand in a tiny tip. Creates the perfect little highlight dots for this style. Note that I'm adding the highlights to the surfaces of the trunks and the leaves, but only on the side that faces the lamppost as the light source. Of course, there is whatever light source is creating these beautiful haunted auras, but the light source for the highlights is the lamppost, so only the undersides of the groupings of leaves and the sides of the trees that face the lamppost. I also used the ink to draw in little focal points of flowers and grasses and those little mushrooms that I added. But they give the illusion of the fullness and break up the forest floor from the path. This also takes some time, but just like the stippling, it's really therapeutic. I love the tiny details and all the time that you get to spend quietly applying them is very relaxing. Last couple little details with the micron again, just to pull out a few tiny details in the bushes and along the path, but not much. Adding my initials and peeling the tape. Always so satisfying to peel the tape, don't you think? And there we go. I really enjoyed these pieces. They only took me one afternoon. And I think anyone could do these, and I made them with very inexpensive supplies and very little advanced technique, just layers, my blow dryer, and some time. So I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.